In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains the defense mechanisms we use to deal with the world.
If you guys, many of you guys have been depressed at least one point in your life, you know, it's actually very common for University of Toronto students, especially in their first year. It's about 1 in 3. If you give students the Beck Depression Inventory, about 1 in 3 University of Toronto students in our research have hit criteria for hospitalization. I mean, the Beck is a little oversensitive as far as I'm concerned, but you know what it's like when you're depressed? It's like it's a part of your personality sort of subsumes the whole, and depression quite classically is, well, you can't think of anything good that happened to you in the past, and you can't think of any reason why the present is good for anything, and you're pretty damn hopeless about the future. And so that's a complex as well, and it's a complex that consists of nothing but negative emotion, and it structures your memory and your perception and your plans for the future all at the same time. Now, Freud had a very lengthy list of ways that people could be treacherous towards experiences they had that they wanted to repress, and so he called them defense mechanisms. This is how you fool yourself into believing that you don't have to take into account a certain set of negative experiences. You know, it's like, well, we'll go through them. Repression, okay, well, we talked about that. Denial, well, denial is a very complicated one. See if I can come up with a good example. Well, there's a classic example for people who have, I think it's called anosognosia, I don't remember exactly. It's neglect. That's a less technical way of thinking about it. So let's say you have a right parietal damage from a stroke, and you lose the left side of your body, so you can't move it anymore. But worse, you don't know it's there, and you don't know that the left side of anything is there anymore. And God only knows how that happens. But like, you'll only eat half the food on your plate, only on the right-hand side. And if someone asks you to draw a clock, you'll cram all the numbers into the one side. And so you kind of lose the idea of left. And I think it's sort of like, you know how when you're looking forward, there's nothing behind you. You can't see anything back here. It's not black. It's not even gone. It's just simply not there at all. And so if you could imagine that sort of stretching around halfway, that seems to be something what neglect is like. But anyways, if you take someone with neglect, according to Ramachandran, and if you irrigate their ear with cold water, the ear on the opposite side, then they'll kind of have a little convulsion, and then all of a sudden they become aware of their missing left side. If you talk to them before you do the irrigation, you say, well, what's up with your left arm? And they'll say, well, my arthritis is bothering me and I don't want to move it. They come up with something that sounds akin to denial, you know. And then if you can snap them out of that with that irrigation, then they'll have a catastrophic emotional response, logically enough, to the loss of their entire left side. And Ramachandran reports that lasting about 20 minutes, and then they'll snap out of it and go right back into the denial. And sometimes people deny things because they can't update. What's happened to them is so overwhelming that they cannot construct a new model. They just rely on the old one. And you see this, well, imagine first that you've just had a tooth pulled, and you know how long your tongue takes to like remap the inside of your mouth. It's really hard to come up with a new concept of you if something catastrophic happens. And so sometimes the denial is just that the thing that has happened is so overwhelming that the person can't model it. But then maybe also they refuse to think about it. And you see this emerging in lots of strange ways. So for example, if people develop diabetes, for example, they're often not very good at taking their medication or regulating their diet. And you might say, well, they're denying the existence of their illness. And to some degree, they're probably doing that because who the hell wants to think that they're diabetic? But even worse than that, it's like, it's complicated to be diabetic. You're no longer the same person that you were. And so you have to learn a whole bunch of new ways to be this new person. What to eat, when to eat, how to check your blood. You have to be careful whenever you go out and eat. Like, there's 100 new things a day that you have to learn. And so separating denial from inability is a hard one, but you can also understand that people might deny, no, that's just not happening. I'm not going to admit to that. Reaction formation, oh, that's one. Maybe you hate your sister, and maybe you have your reasons, but you shouldn't hate your sister. So what you do is act as if you really, really like her. That's an overcompensation. So that's another form of defense mechanism. Displacement. My boss yells at me, I yell at my husband yells at the baby bites the cat. Well, they're not really dealing with the problem, which is the boss. It's just pushed on down the road. And identification, you're bullied. And instead of coming to terms with the fact that bullying occurs, you start bullying other people. Rationalization, well, you know what that means already. You know, maybe you don't do your homework, you're procrastinating. I bet you can come up with 15 rationalizations, no problem, for why it's actually not necessary for you to do your homework right then. Intellectualization, well, Woody Allen's movies are about like that. He's got all these neurotic problems, but he's smart, and so he can come up with intelligent reasons why he's so messed up, even though he knows he's messed up and it doesn't help. Sublimation, well, that was one of the things that Freud thought characterized art. So, for example, there's a lot of erotic content in art. And so if you're having trouble establishing a relationship, or if you want to have a relationship with many people, then maybe what you do is sculpt nudes or paint them. And then there's projection, which is I'm having an argument with you, and I'm unwilling to admit to my dark motivations, and I'm very skeptical of you, and so I assume that you're characterized by all the dark motivations that I won't admit to in myself. So now, Freud also believed that it was unconscious ideas that were at the core of psychological conflicts, and he described those conflicts as incomprehensible distress, psychosomatic symptoms, and so those would be the manifestation of psychological the manifestation of psychological content in bodily form. So that might be stress. A stress-related illness might be one way of thinking about that. I've had clients who had hysterical epilepsy, so that was quite interesting. So that was a somatic manifestation of a psychological problem. Back when Freud was practicing, hysteria was much more common, and maybe that was partly because Victorian society was so centered on the theater and so dramatic, and people would come in with like a paralyzed arm or something like that he could sort out with hypnosis. And so they were manifesting their psychological distress in bodily form, often in a manner that was representative of that psychological conflict in some way. Behavioral anomalies, hallucinations, and delusions. He thought that all of those could be manifestations of internal psychological conflict with their sets of unconscious ideas. So, you know, let's go back to the boss example. Your boss says something nasty to you, you come home, someone says something a bit provoking, and you fly off the handle, and then you have an argument about what the hell's up with you, because they say, well, look, what I said was, you know, this big, and you reacted like this, and you're going to say, well, no, you're always annoying like that, and which is kind of a denial thing, and maybe the person doesn't let up, and they say, no, I really know that something's wrong, and you do like 6 other things to keep them the hell away from you, and finally they're persistent enough, so you break down crying, and you say, well, I had this terrible day at work, and you didn't even really notice that you knew that until the moment of the tears. And you see that very frequently in psychotherapy too. If you're talking to people, for example, maybe they're relating a story about their marriage that collapsed badly, and they're talking, and all of a sudden they'll say something and they'll tear up, and then they'll continue, and you can grab that. You say, look, you just said something. I noticed that your eyes filled with tears when you said that. What was going through your mind? Now, often unless you catch it quick, they'll forget. So they're talking, and the talking about the past is, you know, flashing off imagistic memories, and you'll say, well, that made you cry, and they often don't like that, because for obvious reasons, that something's come up that they don't want to talk about. And so you say, well, what was flashing through your mind? And the person will tell you like quite a lengthy little memory fantasy about a sequence of events that, you know, is still a hot button issue. And that's another example of this underlying complex, you know. And if you watch people, you can watch people in normal conversation, this happens all the time, their eyes will move, or they'll smile, or you can see as they're speaking that all sorts of different ideas are flitting through their head. It's dreamlike in a sense too. It's sort of as if the person is talking and they're dreaming at the same time. There's this image-laden set of memories that's going on at the same time. And that can be quite broad, far broader than they could encapsulate in the words.